What's up everyone, welcome to this video in which I'm going to talk about the SQLAlchemy ORM. So SQLAlchemy provides the core as well as the object relational mapper that allows us to model our database tables in two classes which then map onto real database tables. Using such classes, we can be able to do things such as querying for data in our databases, updating, deleting, and modifying our database records. We can also go ahead and basically define some attributes that belong to those tables without having to write any SQL or without having to write any Python that describes how our tables will be using SQL. So I know I've talked a lot, and without further ado, let us get into the video. So right here in my VS Code, I've created a simple virtual environment, and in this virtual environment, I've already installed the latest version of SQLAlchemy, which is SQLAlchemy 2.0. So the first thing we're going to do is to establish a connection to a simple database. And in these examples, I'm going to be showing you an SQLite database. So I'm going to create a simple file right here, and I will call this file connect.py. So inside connect.py, let me enlarge this a little bit. Inside our connect.py, we're going to begin by creating a connection. So the way we connect to our database in SQLAlchemy is by using the create engine function. So using this create engine function, we go ahead and create an engine object, which helps us to establish a connection to our database. So to begin, I'm going to begin by importing it. So I'll say from SQLAlchemy, we're going to import, so in this case, I'll import our create engine. And once I've created this, I've imported our create engine function. I'm going to go ahead and create our engine object. And this engine object is going to be a call to our create engine function. So this create engine function takes in the first and most important attribute or argument, which is basically our URL or the path to our database. Now, depending on the database you may be using SQLite or Postgres or MySQL. You go ahead and provide a database URL to that specific database. Now, in our example, we're going to be making use of SQLite, so I'm going to use this syntax right here. So it follows a syntax of you defining the database, which is going to be SQLite for our example, and then you go ahead and define where that database is going to be. Now, in this case, we want this database to be within our current project folder, which is right here. So I'll just go ahead and add another slash and then say that our simple database is going to be sample.db. So once we've been able to do that, then using this, we can be able to create our simple connection. So to create our simple connection, I'm going to be using the with statement, and using this with statement, we shall basically create a connection object. So what I'll do is to say with engine dot connect, and in this case, when we call this, then we are going to hide whatever is brought about by connecting to our database as the connection object. So let me call this our connection. So this within this context is what we call our connection object, and we can go ahead and use it to connect to our database. So to do that, I basically create a variable called result, and this variable called result is going to be equal to. So in here we shall say, let me make my mic stand a little bit well. So in here, what I'm going to do is to say connection. So we can basically execute some SQL in here. So can call connection.execute, and in here I'll basically create a text object that will stand for an SQL statement. And to do that, I'll just go at the top and import our text function. So then I'll create text, and in this case, what I'll do is to provide a new expression or a new SQL query. So in this case, what we're going to do is to just write a simple select. So I'll say select, and then I'll provide hello. So this is just to test our connection. And once I've been able to do that, then I'll just come and print our result.all. So once we've been able to print this result.all, we shall be able to access our simple result of basically selecting hello from our database. So let's go ahead and try to run this file. So I'm going to pull up my terminal right here. So I have to first activate the virtual environment I created with source env. So I'm on Windows, so I'll use scripts and then activate. So that will go ahead and activate our virtual environment, just like you see right here. So if we go ahead and run our file, so I'll say python connect.py, and in this case we shall now see that this is going to return the result of us querying or us selecting hello from our simple SQLite database. So the first thing I'm going to do is to also add another argument to our create engine function, or to our call of a create engine function, so that you can be able to see what is actually going on in the database side. So in case we want to see any SQL that is going to be returned, we need to specify echo and then give it true. So for us to do that, I'm going to go right where we have our engine object, and then after providing our URL, I'll then come and say that echo is going to be equal to true. So if we go ahead and run this, then we expect it's going to bring some SQL statements, and it's going to show us what really happened in our database. Now in this case, we shall see select hello, and then it will go ahead and print our result, which is basically our result.all, just like you see right here. So for now, we've been able to connect to our database. Let's go ahead and look at how we can create our database models. Now, SQLAlchemy ORM provides for us a very easy way of creating these models. So if you followed my videos, one of my most popular videos, I talked about the previous version of SQLAlchemy, and we talked about how we can use the declarative base function to create the base class. However, in SQLAlchemy 2.0, they have created a class which is called the declarative base class, and using inheritance, we can inherit from that class, create a base class, and then be able to create our database models, just like you're going to see right now. So what I'm going to do is to go right in here. I'll create a new file, and I'll call this models.py. So within models.py, we are first of all going to begin by importing the declarative base class. So what this declarative base class is going to do is to allow us to create our base class from which all our database model classes are going to inherit. So let's begin by doing that. So let me pull this back. I'll say from SQLAlchemy.orm. So now we are accessing the ORM part. In this case, shall import our declarative base. So this is going to be our declarative base class. And once we've been able to do that, then we want to get access to all the attributes that exist within that class. So we're just simply going to create a class, and we shall call this our base class. So this is actually going to be our base. And in here, we are going to inherit from declarative base. So once we've been able to do this, then we shall pass, and this will be enough to give us access to every attribute that we shall need within our declarative base class. Now that we have our base class, let's go ahead and create our database models. So I'm going to be using the example that we used in the previous video. Please go ahead and check it out. I'll leave it at the top. So we created an example where we had two classes, and we had the class of user. So our user is going to be inheriting from our base class, and then we are also going to have our, so let's just call it a comment. So this comment is also going to inherit from our base class. So we shall pass this from now. So in the previous video, what we did was to create table objects, and using these table objects, we basically created something similar to a create table statement, where we went ahead and defined each column and its attributes, just like normal SQL. SQLAlchemy 2.0 has changed things a little bit. You need to use a mapping, and then you map onto a type, and then we go ahead and define other attributes, just like we are going to see. So for us to map each of our database table attributes onto our class, we need to import a certain class which is called the mapped class. So the mapped class is going to allow us to define the types of each of the columns that we shall define on our specific tables. So let's go ahead and import our mapped class. So right here at the top where we imported our declarative base class, we're going to go ahead and also import our mapped class. And once you've been able to do that, now let's define some attributes on our database tables. So what I'll do is to go right where we have our users. So the first thing is always to define our table name. SQLAlchemy always wants us to define our name of our table. So I'll go ahead and say that our table name attribute is going to be equal to the name of our table. So let's just keep it to users. And then the next thing we're going to do is to define a primary key for each of our tables. Now in this case, let's begin with our user table. So I'll say that our ID. So SQLAlchemy is actually also using Python type hints, or basically type hinting, to help you to map each of these columns onto a specific type. So that's been different from the way you are doing it for the previous version of SQLAlchemy, where you actually use the column class to go ahead and define the type. So in here, what we can do is to just use the mapped class. So since this is going to be an integer, we can say mapped, and then we can basically provide the int type. And then if we want to specify other attributes such as the primary key or other constraints such as nullable or primary key or any other constraints, then there is another function that we're actually supposed to use, and that's going to be the mapped column function. So for us to import that, still we have to import it from SQLAlchemy.orm. Now I'll go at the top right here and say mapped column. And if we want to define more attributes, then all we have to do is to come right here and say mapped column. Now in this case, since this is going to be our primary key, we want to basically specify that in our definition. So we're going to say that our primary key is going to be equal to true. And once we've been able to do that, now what this stands for is our ID is going to be a column, which shall be an integer, and this is going to be our primary key. So let's go ahead and define the same for our comments table. So I'll go right here, and all I have to do is to just basically copy what we have here. I think the table name is the only thing that will change. So if I paste it right here, now we are going to have our table being equal to. So this is going to be our comments, and we shall have our primary key being the same. Now let's go ahead and define the attributes that belong on our users table. So on our users table, we're going to have a username. So this is basically a simple username. And this username is going to be a string. So we shall say mapped and then provide the string type right here. Now, in case we want to add, like, let's say not now constraint or nullable constraint, we can just come and say mapped column and then say that our nullable, so it's actually going to be nullable, and this will be nullable false, so that this cannot be left now. And then you can also define a field such as the email. So in this case, we can say that our email, or let's call it the email address, and this can also be a mapped, and this will be a string. So we can basically say this is going to be a mapped string, and we can leave this optional, so we can basically leave it the way it is. Now let's go ahead and also define some of the attributes that will exist on our comments table. So for us to do that, I'm going to go right where we have our comments table class, and after our primary key, which is our ID, we're now going to define some of the attributes that will belong to the comments class. So the first attribute that we're going to add onto this class is going to be the user ID attribute. And this is because we want to establish some kind of relationship between each comment created and a user. So user is going to be able to create a simple comment in our imaginary application. So in this case, what we're going to do is to specify that this is going to be our user ID. Now this user ID is going to be an integer, so we have to begin by basically describing that it's going to be a mapped, and then this will be an int. Now in case we want to add other attributes by defining it as a foreign key, then we'll have to do it under the mapped column function. So let's first begin by importing our foreign key class. So I'll go at the top right here, and then I'll say from SQLAlchemy, we are going to import So this is going to actually be our foreign key. So I'll say import our foreign key. And once we've imported our foreign key, we shall come right here where we have our user ID, and then we shall say that it's going to be a mapped column. And in this case, what we need to do is to define that this will be our foreign key. So a foreign key always has to be referencing a certain column in another database table. In this case, what we want to refer to is going to be our user ID. So the way we do that is by basically referring to the user's table name right here. So shall come and say it's going to be a foreign key that represents that references users dot, and then here we shall say our ID. So once we've been able to do that, then we can also describe the comment text field. So in this case, we shall maybe just call this our text, or the text for that specific comment. And this is going to be a mapped. So in this case, we can say a mapped string, and we can also call this text. So we can say mapped column, and this will be text. So the way we can do that is by coming at the top right here and importing the text class or the text type, and then we can provide that as our text. And then we want this not to be nullable, so we can say nullable equals to false. We can also do the same thing for our foreign key, so that we do not allow users to provide a comment that is not associated with the user. So we can say nullable is going to be equal to false. And once we've been able to do this, then since these tables are basically created from our base class, we can also define relationships that will allow us to easily access them by using attributes of our classes. Now we're going to basically create relationships that will help us to access users, or help us to access user comments, as well as accessing the users who wrote certain comments. So that's where relationships come in. Now, in this case, we've created a one-to-many relationship, and what we need to do is just define a bunch of attributes that will allow us to access the user who created a certain comment, as well as access comments that belong to a certain user. So to do that, we're going to use what is called the relationship attributes that SQL provides for us to help us create this basically reverse relationships that will allow us to access that data. So if we go at the top, we are going to go to where we imported our from SQLAlchemy ORM, and then we are going to import our relationship. So when having a user, what we need to do is to go ahead and try to access the comments that belong to that specific user. And the way we're going to do that is by defining a field or an attribute to our user class, and that is going to be our comments attribute. So in this case, if we have a user object that we've saved into our database, we can then go ahead and access all the comments that were posted by that specific user through user object dot and then comments. So let's see how that is going to happen. So if we say comments, then we are going to go ahead and map this using the mapped class, because each of the fields on our class has to be mapped, because this is the way SQLAlchemy 2.0 does its things. So in this case, we want to basically go ahead and create this and call it mapped, but we want this to be a list of comments so that these can actually be comment objects. Now, the way we're going to do that is by using the list class that comes from the Python typing package. So I'll go ahead and import that. So I'll say from typing. So this is inbuilt. You don't have to install it. So I'll say from typing, we shall go ahead and import our list class. Now, what we want to do is to define this comments attribute as one that's going to return for us a list of comments by that specific user. So the way we're going to do that is by coming right here and saying mapped, and then in here we are going to basically define this as a list, and this list is going to be a list of comment objects. So since this is defined down here, Python does not know that it actually exists when we are here. So the way we're going to access that is by using quotes, and then we shall provide comments. So once we've been able to do that, then the next thing is going to be for us to define our relationships. Actually, I'm getting an error here or a warning that comments is not defined, because what we needed to do is to define this as our comment class. So I'll have to remove that S, and that will be okay. So now that we've been able to do that, let's go ahead and use our relationship function to help us access these comments, or basically define the reverse relationship between comments and users. So the way we're going to do that is by coming and saying equals, and instead of saying mapped colon, this is going to be a relationship attribute. So we shall say relationship, and in here we are going to say back populates, and this back populates attribute or argument is going to refer to what we shall use to access users on specific comments. Now in this case, that will be something like comment.author or comment.user. So we shall go ahead and say user, so that we can access a comment. A comment is user, or a comment author through the comment itself. And then we shall do the same thing right here. However, for the comments, what you're going to do is to define an attribute that will allow us to access the user who created the comment. Now I want you to understand this. In our user class, what we're doing is to access comments written by a specific user. However, in the comments, what you're going to do is to access the user who created a specific comment. Now that's why these relationships become tricky, but I hope you have understood that. So what you're going to do is to go ahead and define the user attribute right here. And the user attribute is going to be the same. It's not going to be the same, but what it will be is going to be a mapped. And in this case, it will be a marked user. So a mapped user. So this will be one single user object. And once you have that, then we can also define our relationship. And then here, if we are to backpopulate, that means we can access, we are to set up the reverse relationship between users and comments. Then what we're going to do here is to say backpopulate, and this backpopulate is going to be equal to our comments. So that means from the user side, we can say user.comments, and that will help us to access comments for a certain user. On the comment side, what we can do is to come and say comment.user, and that will produce for us the user who created a certain comment. Now, another thing I'm going to do is to go ahead and define methods that will help us to represent our database objects as strings, or basically give us a very good and clear representation of these objects. So I'm going to come and define that as our danda str. So I'll just come and say def. It's actually going to be danda repre. And in here, what I have to do is to define how we want to return each user object. Now in this case, I'll just come and say user, and we shall provide our user as username. So our username is going to be self.username. And another thing we're going to do, we shall do the same thing for our comments. Now in this case, I'll just come right here and define our comments. So I'll say def repre, and in this case, we shall have self. And here, what we're going to do is to say return. Here we shall say return comment. So in this case, we shall say comment. And what we would want to do is to just basically return some of the text, or the text. So I'll just say comment text is equal to self.text. And in here, what we can do is to go ahead and also maybe access the user. So you can say self.user, then let's say our username. So that will actually give us the username. So we've been able to define our database models, and using these database models, we're going to be able to create objects, and then those objects we shall go ahead and use an object-oriented approach to save them to our database. However, at this point, we have not been able to write these tables to an actual database. So for us to do that, then we shall go ahead and create a new file. So I'll create a new file in here, and I'm going to call this create tables.py. So inside create tables, I'm going to go ahead and first of all import our I'm going to import our database models, just like the ones we've created right here. And then we shall also import our base class. Now you're going to see how things are going to get interesting. So if we go within our create tables file right here, I'll go ahead and say from models, we are going to import, first of all, let's import our base class. And then we are going to import our user as well as our comments. So in this case, we shall import our comments. So once we've been able to do that, then the next thing is going to be for us to use our base class to create our database tables. Now, I know some of you may not notice it, but when using the SQLAlchemy ORM, what you'll have to do is to define a bunch. Actually, you define one metadata object, and then you attach all the database tables you create onto that metadata object. Then you bind it to one engine for it to be able to create your database tables in the database. However, SQLAlchemy ORM does it in quite an interesting way. In the SQLAlchemy ORM, the base class will define the metadata object without you having to actually go ahead and define it. So creating database tables in the database is going to be as simple as saying base. So it's actually going to be base dot metadata dot create. So it's actually going to be dot create all. And once we've been able to do that, then we shall go ahead and bind our create all function to an engine. So I'll go ahead and import that. So say from connect, we actually created our connect file. Then we shall go ahead and import that, and we shall import actually the engine variable or the engine object that we created when connecting to our database. So we shall just come and say that bind is equal to engine. So I'll just write a simple print statement right here and say print creating tables. So once you have that, I'll save. So now this is the moment of truth. Let's see if what we've done or how we've defined our models actually works. So I'll pull up my terminal right here. And what I have to do, so let me make this a little bit bigger so that you guys can see. I'll also pull up my terminal. So if I run Python, it's actually Python. So this is actually going to be Python create tables.py. So we now see that our database tables have been created successfully. And we also see that this is actually going ahead to check if the information that we provided is actually real valid code to define our users as well as our comments table. And once we've been able to do that, then the next thing is going to be for us to create our database tables. Now this is the SQL for creating our users tables, and this is also the SQL for creating our comments table. We can also be able to notice that a relationship has been created between our users table as well as our comments table. And we also have the foreign key, which is going to be our user ID, and that is going to reference our ID column on our users class. Now that we've been able to create our database tables into our database, let us go ahead and look at how we can access or how we can actually be able to persist and create database records. So let me begin by first of all opening up our DB browser for SQLite, a tool that will allow us to basically go ahead and view our database structure as well as help us to verify if we have really inserted data into our SQLite database. I'm going to open it up here. So it's going to be a DB browser. So I'm going to pull it from the monitor where I have it right here. And then I'll go ahead and open our database. So our database is created in documents, coding. I think I created it here. So it's going to be a sample database. So in here, what you see is we've created our comments table, and these are the actual fields that we've defined. We have also created our users table, and these are the different attributes, so the different fields that exist on that specific users table. If we can also go ahead and browse our data, so this is how the view will be. And if we go right here in our users table, this is how we shall also have to view our database. So let's go ahead and try to insert some database records into our simple database. So I'm going to go right where our code is right here. So I'll pull down our terminal and we continue. So I basically create a file right here. I'm going to call this inserting. Let's actually call it persisting.py, because this is actually going to go ahead and persist this in the database. So shall call this persisting.py. So inside persisting.py, we're going to begin by first of all importing all our database models. So I'll do that by saying from models, we are going to import our, so in this case, we shall import our user and also our comment class. So once we've been able to import this, then the next thing is going to be for us to create objects that are going to represent data or real records in our database. So this is the beauty about using an ORM. When using an ORM, you don't have to know the details of the SQL that's required for you to do things such as inserting. All you have to do is to create objects of the model classes that you created, and then you use what is called a session object to go ahead and persist them to the database, just like we're going to see right here. So to begin, we are going to create a user. So we're going to call this user 1, and then this user is going to be a user object. So this user will have attributes such as the username. So let's provide for them a username. So their username is going to be maybe Jonah, and then they will also have an email address. So in this case, we shall have our email address. Hopefully we called it that. So this is actually going to be our email address. So in here we can say that our email address is going to be equal to, let's say, Jonathan at SQL dot, let's say, org, whatever that is. Then the next thing we shall do is to go ahead and also provide some comments that are written by this user. Now, for us to be able to do this, we can just use our attribute right here, which is basically our comments attribute. So the way we can do that is by just coming right here and then coming and saying that our comments is going to be equal to a list of comment objects. Now, in here, what we're going to do is to just come and say our comments. So our first comment is going to just be one that has a text of, let's say, hello world, and then the next comment will be, let's say, so this will actually be text, which is going to be equal to please subscribe, which will actually be good if you went ahead and hit that subscribe button. Doesn't really cost anything. So after doing this, then we're also going to go ahead and create other objects or other user objects. Now I'm going to create this user. I've created this as user 1. So let me create another user object. So I'll call this object Paul, and we shall basically have the same thing but with different things. So with different attributes. So in this case, I'll just provide our user. So the name inside here is going to be Paul. And then here we may also provide the name Paul. And the comments here may be, let's say, what's up. And then here we shall also have him telling you guys to subscribe. So we can also have other attributes. So let's say Kathy. So Kathy is also going to be a user. But let's say Kathy does not have any comments. She's a quiet person. So she'll just have her user attributes. So this is going to be Kathy. Or let me actually just say Kathy. And then we shall also have the name Kathy, just like you see right here. So we've been able to create some database or some model objects, just like you see right here. And the next thing we're going to do is to go ahead and insert them into our database. So for us to be able to insert them, SQLAlchemy ORM provides for us what is called a session class. Now, using the session class, we can create a session object, and this session object will help us to pretty much go ahead and insert these into our database. So for us to do that, then we're first of all going to import our session class. So I'll go at the top right here, and then I'll say from SQLAlchemy.orm, we shall go ahead and import our session class. And once we've been able to create the session class, now what we need is a session object. So I'll say session is going to be equal to our session instance, but this has to be bound to an engine, so we shall have to import our engine that we created while connecting to our database right here. So I'll just come and say that we are going to import, so we shall say from connect, we are going to import our engine. And once we've been able to do that, then we shall just come right here and say bind is going to be equal to engine. So once we've been able to do that, then all we have to do is to just come right here and then say session dot add. And in case we're doing an individual object, we'll just say add. But in this case, we have a variety of user objects. Therefore, we'll have to just say session dot add all. And then here, we'll have to provide an instance or a list of instances that we want to go ahead and save or persist to our database. Now, in this case, we have to provide our user one. So this is going to be a user list. So we shall have our user one, we shall have Paul, and then we shall also have Kathy. The next thing we shall do is to go ahead and commit these changes to our database. So that will be the actual persisting or the actual saving of these database objects. So to do that, we shall just come and say session dot commit, and that will be just enough to insert this into our database. Now, for us to go ahead and run this code, I'm going to pull up my terminal, and what I have to do is to say Python persisting.py. So if we run this, we shall see that a bunch of insert statements have been carried out. So we see insert into users, blah, blah, blah. And these are going to be the arguments. We shall see insert into users, blah, 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 but it's inserting many values. So we now see that all these have been inserted. So for us to confirm, I'll go back to our DB browser for SQLite. So I'll refresh, and I will see that our users have been created. Let's also go ahead and see our comments. So if we go within our comments, we shall now see that our comments have been added, which is good. So if I open up here, we see that our comments have been added. We also have our relationship. So these are just foreign keys to our IDs that we have in our users table. So we've been successful in persisting data to our database. Now let's go ahead and look at how we can insert data, actually how we can be able to select or query, or the different ways we can query data from our simple database. So to select items in our database, what we shall have to do is to use our session object, just like we've been able to use it to persist items in our database. So if we go right in our code, I'm going to create a simple file, and I'm going to call this our simple select. So I'll call this simple select.py. So within simple select.py, we shall still need our database model. So I shall say, we shall actually come and say from. So what I'm going to actually do is to make sure that where we have one session object. So I'll just basically come and where we've persisted, I'll just come and say that this session object is what we're actually going to use for our entire code. So I'll just come and say from our persist. So it's actually going to be from our persisting. We shall import our session object. Then we shall also access our model. So I'll say from models, we are going to import our user as well as our comment. And then for us to be able to query for all our specific objects from the database or records from the database, then it is as simple as we can. There are basically very many approaches in which we can do this. First of all, we can create a statement. So let's actually first of all look at how we can create a statement. Now this statement is very similar to how we did when looking at the SQLAlchemy core. For us to create a select statement, we shall just have to import the select statement from SQLAlchemy. So we shall do that from SQLAlchemy. We shall import our select statement. And once you have this select statement, the next thing we shall do is to go ahead and formulate a select statement and then query for data based on specific criteria that you may want. So in this case, what I'll do is to form a simple statement. So I'll say the ask statement is going to be select, And in this case, we shall provide our entity or our model. In this case, it will be our user model. Then we shall basically use our where function. So in this case, we shall say where. So what we want to do in this case is to basically query for the username. So we can just say where user dot username. And in this case, what we can do is to basically, we can do very many things. We can even query over very many attributes. For example, we may want to check for users that have the name Jonah or Kathy, or users that are within a list of names such as Jonah, Kathy, and Paul. So let's try to do that. So we can say we want to select where the user's username is in. So we can say dot in, and then this is a function that will take in an iterable of attributes that we want to check against. Now let's say in this case we want to check for users Paul, and let's say the user Kathy. So what this will do is to go ahead and select our users table, select from our users table, and what we may want to return is the user Paul as well as the user Kathy. And if they do not exist, then this will actually be an empty query. So for us to be able to execute this statement, then what we shall have to do is to create a result variable, and this is going to be a result of using our session object to execute this statement. Now in this case, you can say that this is going to be session.scalar. So this will basically implement our statement, or basically execute our SQL statement, and then return it as an iterable of scalars, just like you see right here. So what we shall do is to go ahead and say that we shall need our statement, and we can now run a simple for loop over our query set. So shall say for, let's say, user in result. So this is actually going to be for user in result. And in this case, we can go ahead and print our user. So I'll just say print user. So if we save and we pull up our terminal right here, if we run Python, so this is actually going to be Python simple select.py. And now we see that this is actually going to go ahead and print our users, Paul and Kathy. Now, we shall now see that this is actually going to return Paul and Kathy as the users as we have selected right here. However, we can also go ahead and try to make this as simple as possible by using the normal way of querying. Now, let me get rid of what we have here. The thing I'm going to do right here is to basically create our users variable. And this users variable is going to basically be, sorry for that, so we shall have users, and then we shall use our session to query against our model. So we shall say something like session.query, and then we can provide our user class. And then in here, if we want to return all, we can just say .all, and then we can run our for loop. So we can say for users in users, this is actually going to be for user in users, sorry for this. So here we can go ahead and print our user. So if we save and then pull up our terminal, we can now go ahead and see that this will actually go ahead and print our users. Now the reason as to why we see many of these being returned is because our session object is being queried or is being brought from our persist class. That means that all the code inside our persist class is going to actually run. Now for me to present this, what I'm going to do is to go ahead and remove our session object from this file, and then I'll create a module right here which I'm going to call main.py. So in here is where I'm actually going to go ahead and put our session object. So instead of having to have it within our persist, so that we persist objects every time, we shall have our session object coming from our main.py. So I'll basically copy what we have here and then paste it in here. So then I'll go ahead and say from this is actually going to be our session, which is going to be equal to our session instance, which is going to be bound to our engine. So this is going to be bind equals engine. And once you've been able to do this, then when you go right here, instead of having our session object created from here, we can just say from main, we are going to import our session. So this means that we shall not have to run our persisting code every time. And even within our simple select, that means we shall have to go ahead and remove this so that we actually have from main import our session. So if we save and try to run our code once again, we shall now see that it will return our list of objects. Now let me go and try to modify this. So if I refresh, I'm going to try to delete some of them. So I'll click on this item. So we now see that our foreign key constraint is failing. So that means you have to delete some comments, just like you see right here. So let me first begin by getting rid of the comments. And then I'll write our changes right here. So if we go back to our users, we shall do the same thing. I'll save. And when we save, if we go back right here, we try to select, we shall see that there is no data in our database, just like you see right here. So let's try to run persist.py independently. So if we run Python persist.py, this is going to go ahead and insert our comments as well as our users. So if we go right here and refresh, we shall see that this is now going to be inserted, which is working well. If we go to our comments will also be inserted just like we had them before. So if we try to select or run our select statement right here, we shall see that this will actually go ahead and print all the users that we actually have within our database table, just like you see right here. We can also go ahead and retrieve users based on specific conditions. For example, want to retrieve a user who has a specific username. Now, since these are classes, we can be able to just return the attributes using object-oriented programming. So we can go ahead and maybe query for a user called Jonah. So let me actually just remove that and create another file right here, which I'm going to call select1. And this is going to be select1.py. Now in here, we shall need to get our session. So we shall say from main, import our session. And then we shall also import our user model. So I'll say from models, we are going to import our user model. So if we want to select one user who has a specific username, for example, Jonah, we can use our session object by saying session.query. And then in here, what we can do is to go ahead and basically provide our model. So this will be our model. So we can just say user, and we can go ahead and use the filter by method. So there are very many methods that the session object will provide for us that will help us to query for our data. So in this case, we shall use our filter by method. And in here, we can specify an attribute that belongs to the user. For example, we want to check if the user's username, and if the user's username is equal to Jonah, and then we want to return, this is actually going to return a query set or a list of user objects that have that specific user attribute. So if we go ahead and try to print this out, let's see what this is going to return. If we print Jonah, if we go ahead and run our file, if we say Python select1.py, we notice that we now have query.filter by text1 positional argument. So let's actually go ahead and see that. So this is actually going to be .filter by, I think this is going to be username equals to our Jonah. Let me just see what this is going to return. And now we see that this will actually select where the user is Jonah. So when you try to print this out, it's not actually printing anything. Seems like the user doesn't really exist. But if we try to maybe go ahead and print .first or .all, so let's try to print .first. Then when you try to access here, what we shall get is we shall get the first user with that specific username, which is Jonah. Now in this case, if we want to maybe return a user who is Paul, now we can specify the user to be Paul, and then if we go ahead and run our select statement, we shall see that in this case it's going to return Paul. So this is basically an easy way for us to be able to query our database without having to have actual knowledge of how to formulate our SQL statements using our select statements and so on. So now that we've looked at how we can do simple selects, let us look at a more advanced example. So the example we're going to look at is one in which we have joining tables, and we're going to do exactly that. We may be faced with situations in which we need to query against many databases, and that's where joining can actually come in handy. So what we're going to do is to query for a comment that was written by a specific user. But what we want to do is to join the actual tables and query across all of them. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'll go within our tables right here, actually within our code, and then I'll create a new file. So just going to call this select with. So this is going to be select with join. And this is going to be a select, but it's going to be different in a way that we are going to select from both the users table as well as our comments table. So let's see how we're going to do that. I'm going to copy some of the code that we had in our simple select one. So I'll just come right here and say from models import user, and then from main import session. So what I'll do is to just copy what we have right here. And after copying it, I'll bring it where we have this. Now I'm also going to include our comment class. And once I've been able to do that, then we are going to make use of the select statement from SQLAlchemy. So I'll just come right here and say from SQLAlchemy, we shall import our select statement. And once we've been able to import that, sorry for what I've done here. So what I'm going to do is to create a statement from this, and this will be a simple select statement. So just come and say that our statement is going to be equal to select, and in this case what we shall do is to select from our user class. But in this case what we want to do is to actually select a comment and want to join the comments table to the users table, and then we'll be able to set up our conditions. So what I'll do is to come and say select comment, and in this case we shall say dot. So this will be dot join, and in here we shall provide that specific target table, which is going to be our user table. But in this case we can also access it from the comment, because these two are related in a way. So the way we can do that is by saying comment dot, and then in this case we can access our user attribute on our comment, the one we actually set up, which is our relationship. Then after doing that, we can go ahead and set up our criterion. And in this case, our condition is going to be dot where, and what we want to do is to search for, in our where clause, what we want to do is to search for the comment with a specific user. So in this case, what you can do is to actually search for that specific comment with the user being equal to, so we can just say the user's name is going to be equal to, let's say, Jonah. And then we can also add another where clause, and in this we can check for the specific text that that specific comment has. And in this case we can say comment dot text, and in this case we can say that that text comment is going to be, let's actually check some of the comments that we have. I think we created a comment that has the name hello world. So when you go to our persist.py, which is actually here, we created the comment with hello world. So let me actually reopen my database, closed it by mistake. So if I open our database, I'll go ahead and open it up and shall access where it is. So it's in documents, coding, and then actually it's our sample.db. So if we open it up, we want to select the comment hello world by user number 1, who is Jonah. So if we check in our users table, we actually have the user with ID of 1 being Jonah. If we want to access that specific comment that has the word hello world by that specific user, we are going to join the two tables and select across both of them. So if we go ahead and do that, what we've done here is to select the comment, but we want to go ahead and target the users table and target that author of that comment, who is Jonah, we want to also select the text where the text is hello world. So in this case, we shall specify our text as hello world. So for us to execute this statement, we shall use our session object. So the way we're going to do that is by coming here and say, so we shall just come and say that our result, and our result in this case is going to be equal to, so in this case we shall come and say session. So that's going to be session dot scalars. So in this case we shall want to return our results as scalars, and we shall provide our statement. So when we provide our statement, then since this is going to be only one comment, we need to add the .1 method. And what this will do is to go ahead and return only that specific comment with the given conditions we have set right here. So if we go ahead and print our result, we shall now see what is going to happen. So if we try to run this, so we pull up our terminal and run Python select with join. That's where it's going to be select with join. In this case, we see that it's going to return the comment hello world by Jonah. So this is basically one way in which you can go ahead and try to query or select your data given multiple tables. So you're basically doing some sort of select across two tables. In this case, we have our comment and our user table. Now let's go ahead and look at how we can modify our objects. So modifying objects is as simple as, so let's create a file right here. So I'm just going to call this modify, or let's actually just say updating.py. And in this case, what we're going to do is to first of all select that specific item that we want to update. So what I'll do is to just come right here and say from, so shall just basically provide what we have here, so we can actually come and import both of our models. And once we've been able to do that, then we can go ahead and first of all query for whatever I want to update. Now let's begin by basically importing or selecting that specific attribute. So let's just select the comment, and let's say we are going to use our session, and then we shall call the .query method. We provide our comment class. In this case, we can filter by, and then we shall provide the ID attribute. So let's say our ID attribute is going to be 1. But since this returns a query set or a list of items that have that specific attribute, then we shall have to add .first, so that we return only one object. So once we have that specific object, then we're going to go ahead and try to update this. So updating this is going to be as simple as saying comment dot. So in this case, let's say I wanted to update the comment text or modify the comment text. We shall just say comment.text, and then we say comment.text is going to be equal to, this is an updated comment. So if we try to go back to our DB browser right here, our first comment is going to be hello world, but this is going to be updated to this is an updated comment. So what we're going to do is to go ahead and use our session object that we created right here to help us go ahead and modify this in our database. So modifying this in our database is going to be as simple as saying session.commit. So once we've been able to do that, then if we run this code, we shall pull up our terminal and say Python updating.py, and that is going to go ahead and create an update statement just like the one we see right here. So it's going to be update comments, set the text to that specific text that we provided right here. So if we go ahead and check in our DB browser, we now refresh, and now we see that our text for our specific comment has been updated to this is an updated comment, just like you see right here. Now deleting is very easy also. If we wanted to delete, what we do is to go ahead and, so I'm going to create another module right here, and then I'll call this deleting.py. So inside deleting.py, what we're going to do is to first import our models. So in this case, we can import both our models and our comments. If we want to delete that specific comment, so what we can do is to go ahead and query for a user. So in this case, you can just come and say, we want to go ahead and call our comments. Let's actually just delete comments. So if I say comment is going to be equal to that specific comment we updated, I can query for it, just like you see right here. And if we provide that specific comment, just like you see right here, what we want to do is to go ahead and delete it. So deleting can also be done from the session. It's just a matter of saying session dot delete. So we call a delete method on our session object. And when you provide an instance or an object that we want to delete, we can use that session to delete that object. So if we come and say session.delete comment, and then for us to basically be able to see that reflect in our database, you have to commit. So we can say session.commit, and that will be just enough to delete from our database. So if we save and pull up our terminal right here, so in this case I'll run python delete.py, and now we'll see that this will run a delete statement. So we shall see delete from statements where comments.id equals, and then that will be the comment ID of 1. So if we go back to our DB browser right here and we try to refresh, we'll now see that that comment will be gone. So that's just a brief overview, or just a simple video to explain how SQLAlchemy ORM works. And I hope you've learned from this video. So in this video, what I've done is to just show you how SQLAlchemy works in SQLAlchemy 2.0. We've seen how it helps us to create our database models using an object-oriented programming approach. And we've also noticed how it uses Python's type hints, which are a modern feature of Python, to help us create mappings of types onto our table attributes. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you've enjoyed it, please leave a like and don't forget to subscribe if you're new. The most Pythonic thing you can do is to actually go ahead and also hit subscribe on this channel, because I have a lot of good and awesome Python content I create. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next video. Bye.